Hello, Mitch Albers from the biology department at Minneapolis College. In this presentation, I'm going to go over some strategies for success, how you can become a more successful student in Biology 1. So let's get started. First of all, let's talk about how you're going to get started in setting up your success journey. And I'm going to start off with a little bit of a story about my experiences when I became an undergraduate student in college. I came out of high school not with the best studying traits, and I was an okay student, but I wasn't a great student, and I needed to improve to figure out how I was going to do better in my courses. And so, I kind of had to learn the process along the way, and maybe we could call it the school of hard knocks, but kind of the more trendy term today is now learning how to learn, and that's exactly how it worked for me. So a lot of the strategies that I'm going to explain today are strategies that I picked up along the way as I learned how to learn, and I hope by sharing these ideas that you might incorporate some of them to help you in your success in taking this biology course. The key to learning, in my perspective, is through active learning. And I think it's really important that you're active, you're doing the learning process rather than looking at, conversely, looking at the more passive ways of learning. Sometimes just reading is very passive, or highlighting your textbook is very passive. And this visual here just basically shows that at the base of that pyramid, when you are actively doing things like not only reading and then writing and then actually doing things during the learning process, you're engaged, you're active, and that's going to allow you to retain information much more greater than, let's say, if you look at the top of the pyramid in that passive learning area where you're just reading, and that only allows you to do certain kinds of outcomes, like being able to maybe regurgitate a definition or list a couple of things. But when you really have to incorporate higher levels of thinking, you need to incorporate active learning strategies. And that's going to allow you to retain that information much greater, and you're going to see much greater success. So you can see in this diagram that if you're just passively doing things like reading, 10% comprehension of what you read, that's telling you 90% of what all that information, especially in a textbook like a biology textbook, doesn't get processed and retained. Even when you attend lectures, you're only 20% of what you're hearing during a lecture presentation. Okay, and then when you incorporate what you see and hear, your retention is going to be a little bit greater. But as you move down that learning pyramid and get into that active learning area, then you can see by being more active and more engaged, you're going to be able to do those higher level kinds of thinking where you can analyze and define and create and evaluate those concepts that you're learning about. So what is active learning? That's what we're going to get into, is talk about some of those strategies that will make you more engaged, more active in the learning process. So I explain to students that when you take a course like a biology course, it's like running a marathon. And if you're a competitive marathon runner, you have to be extremely strategic in how you're going to run the race. And a marathon is a long run. If you've ever had an opportunity to do a marathon, I highly encourage it. It's a great accomplishment. It's a huge goal in life to run a marathon. And from start to finish, you have to set a pace, and you have to be strategic. You have to be smart in making sure you don't go running out too fast, too soon, too early. And then, you also have to be prepared for some bumps in the road. And how are you going to deal with those? And one of the big things you hear about with marathon runners is that, maybe 18, 20 miles into a 26-mile race, they hit something called the wall. And that's where, they pretty much have depleted their energy resources, and their muscles are starting to fatigue. And it's your body's telling you, it's just hard to keep going, keep your feet going one in front of the other. But your head has to kind of overcome and tell your body to keep going. And that's what a lot of marathoners have to do in their training. And that takes a lot of mental strength to overcome the physical limitations that sometimes our bodies are telling us. So you have to be strategic, and you want to make sure you finish the race and you finish successfully. Maybe you're setting a certain time that you want to finish, or maybe it's just finishing. Nonetheless, you have a goal. And so, taking a course is very similar to running a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not just go out and flat out run it as fast as you can. That's not the strategy. You need to be purposeful and thinking about how you're going to be running throughout the whole race. And in this case, how are you going to be strategic and navigating through the whole semester of the course, where you're doing all your lecture work, your lab work, assignments, quizzes, tests, studying, and so forth. The first thing that you need to start off with is always a very positive attitude. The better your attitude, the better your success. And if you think you're going to struggle in the class, you're probably going to struggle. But if you can go into the class saying, you know what, I'm going to do as well as I can, and I'm going to push myself to work hard and stay positive along the way, despite as sometimes it's going to get tough, and there's going to be deadlines, and there's going to be all these things that you need to persevere in keeping that positive attitude throughout the semester. That will get you a long, long way. So I encourage you, starting off right now with a good positive attitude is really important to your success. You need to set goals. And maybe you've heard this acronym, SMART goals. And the S is set very specific goals. What are the things that you want to get out of this course? Are they measurable? It's not just about getting that B or A grade at the end of the semester, but maybe it's, making sure that you're going to, work hard on the lab part and really put an emphasis and effort into getting most out of the lab. A lot of students who don't work hard on the lab don't see the connection between the lecture and the lab. And there is a very strong connection. And when you're doing that active lab work, hands-on, we're utilizing many of the concepts you're learning and hearing about in lecture, and where you get that hands-on experience. But a lot of students don't make that connection. So, set your goals to be measurable in lecture and lab. Make sure they're achievable, and realistic. If you are working full-time and you're taking an overload of classes, and you're a single parent, maybe an A isn't really the realistic goal in this course. Maybe you should be happy, maybe setting it for like a B, and be happy with that. I get so many students who I got to get an A, I got to get A, I got to get an A. Well, I can tell you at the end of the semester, not every student earns an A. And so, that whole saying, what you put into it is what you're going to get out of it, plays a key role. So make sure you have the realistic effort to achieve that realistic goal. And then the T in SMART is being timely. This course is full of deadlines, and you need to make sure you're adhering to those deadlines and staying on schedule and staying on task and not falling behind, because once you fall behind, it's so hard to catch up. So make sure your time management is working in your favor, so that you're going to get a real positive outcome in the course. So goal setting is extremely important, and we call those SMART goals. In a biology course, you have two major tasks to accomplish. That is one of mastering the vocabulary. Biology is kind of got a language of its own. If you've dove into a biology textbook and you start reading some of the long, big terms that we have in this course, yeah, it's an extensive vocabulary. And then the second task is understanding the concepts and principles of biology. And the way that you go about mastering those two tasks is very different. The vocabulary is about as easy as the kind of thinking that you're going to do in a class like this. It's that rote memorization. It's the repetition of memorization. And that's all part of the learning process. You're not going to be able to get through a class just by memorizing things, but memorization is part of the learning process. And so we use tools like vocabulary cards, flashcards, smartphone apps that have built-in flashcard capability to master that vocabulary, get up on that vocabulary with each of the chapters that you're covering, and then practice it. And that's the repetition, going through it over and over again. And actually doing the handwritten flashcards is probably the best strategy, because you're writing out those cards and you're utilizing more senses, and that's active. You're actively engaged, writing the terms down and the definitions, and maybe writing some examples or sketching a sketch of that particular concept, so that you can help you to practice memorizing it and remembering those concepts when you have to recall them. So the vocabulary is, again, it's some of the easier type of thinking we're doing in a class like this. And when it comes to thinking, that's where understanding concepts and principles plays in. And this is a pyramid of a thinking model that a guy named Benjamin Bloom, we call it Bloom's taxonomy of higher thinking. He proposed this. He was an educational psychologist, and Bloom's taxonomy is used in all levels of education throughout the world. And basically, according to Bloom, is that we think at 6 different levels, starting at the bottom, remembering, and then moving up to understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Creating is the highest level thinking that we do. And I have a whole page in my syllabus that explains Bloom's taxonomy. And if you watch this presentation online, there'll be a link to an explanation of a more in-depth look at Bloom's taxonomy. But basically, if you get yourself familiar with Bloom's, this will help you to better understand when you're asked questions on assignments and quizzes and exams, to better understand what level of thinking are you being asked to think at. And just like we were looking at the first task of learning the vocabulary, that's all down at the remembering level of our thinking. And that's the easiest. That's where we just basically recall information from our memory. But then as you move up into the green understanding level, well, now this is, where you're making sense of the material you learned down in the remembering level, at the base level. Okay, and here there are key words that will, when you have to understand something, that's maybe where you have to explain something or be able to teach it. It's a higher level of thinking. And then you get up to things like applying. Now you're applying what you've learned, and analyzing. When you get up to applying and analyzing, that's a lot of things like you do in a math and physics and chemistry course, where you're having to work through a problem. One of the reasons why those courses are more challenging to students, because they require higher levels of thinking. And then when you get up to the evaluating and creating, those are the highest levels of thinking that we do. And certainly to get to that level, you have to have mastered some of those lower levels of thinking in the concept areas that you're studying and learning about. So as an introductory biology course, we're going to spend most of our time in the purple, green, and blue in the base of the pyramid, getting to, working at those lower levels of thinking. And then obviously students who get into their majors and go on to graduate school, they're going to spend more time at those higher levels. So Bloom's taxonomy is an extremely useful tool to help students understand the learning process and how we think. And if you get more familiar with it, which I highly encourage you to do, it can be a very useful tool to helping in your success. So check out that page in the course syllabus where I have a more in-depth explanation of Bloom's taxonomy, and then go into the website and watch that video on Bloom's to get a little more detailed explanation of how we utilize it. Again, active learning requires higher thinking. And so these two pyramids sitting side by side over on the right, you're looking again at the Bloom's taxonomy that we just explained. Remembering is the level of thinking that's kind of at the lowest of levels that we think, just memorizing, remembering things, and then creating and evaluating, they're up at the top. That's the highest level of thinking. Whereas on the pyramid on the left, which is inverted, where at the top, which is the base, where where in the learning process where you is your greatest retention and understanding. But when you get to where you are able to teach others that concept correctly, then you're at the highest level. And the way that you get yourself to being able to teach someone else that concept is by doing all those things: attending lecture, reading the textbook, going through the visuals and auditory support materials that are in the class, seeing demonstrations, doing hands-on work in the lab, working with others in the class. Maybe it's a study partner or a study group or your lab partners in the lab. Practice by doing. That's the whole purpose of the lab, is to give you that hands-on experience to where you're going to better understand. You're going to see how these concepts play out by doing biology in the lab. And then you get to that point where you've mastered the concepts, the vocabulary, and you have that ability to teach others those concepts. And that, to get to that level, you've used many of these active learning strategies to get to where you're at that higher thinking level. Mentioned earlier with the SMART goals, being timely. Time management is huge for success in students taking a biology course. You have to think about how you're spending your time and sticking to a time management plan, if you will. Let's go into that a little bit more detail. When you're studying biology, the amount of time that you should be spending studying, when the biology 2200 class is a 3-hour lecture course with a 2-hour lab. And in lab, we convert the 2 hours to 1 hour. So you're spending about 4 hours. We basically say for every hour in class, you should be spending 3 hours outside of class. So with a 4-credit course, you should be spending at least 12 hours a week outside of class. And then, you also have to attend the lab each week. So, and doing your lab work, and that would be some additional time. So that's the rule for successful students. Okay. So you certainly could put less time in, but what are you going to get in terms of an outcome? And what's your success going to be? It's going to be lower. But students who are devoting and setting their time management to meet these minimum time requirements are practicing, they're actively engaged, doing learning strategies, and that's helping them in their overall course success. So make sure you're spending plenty of time. And when it comes to time, you can really sit down and break it down. Sometimes that sounds like a lot of time, but when you look at, like, for every 1 credit hour you're in class, you should be spending 3 hours outside of class studying. And I mentioned biology 2200 is a 3-credit course. So 3 times 3, that would be 9 hours of studying, just with the lecture. And then, you're taking other courses that you need to factor in. And, just with your schoolwork, you can see that, on a typical student who's carrying a full load in a semester, you're spending about 66 hours a week outside of actually attending class and doing labs, that sort of thing. Then when you actually look at how many hours are in a week, there's 168 hours, subtract time to sleep at night. That gives you 119 hours of where you're awake, doing things, doing schoolwork, eating, working, playing. Okay, you still opens up where you have, 50, after you subtract your schoolwork, you have 53 hours a week to do your work and to do socializing and having some fun as well. So sometimes we need to break it down and really be strategic to look, where am I spending my time? Okay, so maybe, you need to do that is set up a time management chart where you're plotting, where do you spend your time each day of the week? Then map it out. Okay, and then you're going to see there are places where you can put in time for studying for biology. And when you set that into your schedule, then stick to it. It's always very easy to just blow it off, but stick to that time schedule to study outside of class, and that's going to build up through the week, and it's going to help with your success, especially if you're utilizing active learning strategies while you're doing that study time. The textbook. Okay, the biology textbook is a huge book. It's full of a lot of vocabulary terms and concepts and principles, and can be a little intimidating to students. So what's the strategy with the textbook? Well, this is an active reading strategy to get way more out of your textbook than trying to sit down and read a chapter from start to finish in one sitting, because that doesn't happen. Your brain simply cannot read a science textbook like a biology text from start to finish in any chapters, because as you're reading, your brain is trying to process all this information, and your brain simply cannot process information that way. Okay, so I have what's the 3 times a chapter method as an active learning strategy for approaching the textbook. And what I'd like you to do is for every chapter, and each week you're scheduled to cover 1 to 3 chapters in this class, is when you get to that new chapter, is skim it, go through it, just kind of page through from the start to the end, and just find out, what is this chapter about? It's got a title, but what are the major concepts and themes of that chapter? So after you're done skimming, you could explain to some imaginary, let's say 12-year-old, what the chapter is about and where they could understand it. Okay, you're not pulling the details or anything like that. It's just an overview, basically, of what this chapter covers. So now you have a good idea. So then go back, and when you get to the end of the chapter, there's usually a summary. When you get to the summary, stop. You don't need to read the summary. Go back to the beginning. This is the second time through. If your second time through the chapter, now sit down, get your note cards out, and write out your vocabulary cards. And just kind of skim through and look for those vocabulary terms. They're going to usually be bold-faced and highlighted in the text, emphasized so that you can identify them, and write them out on a note card and write their definition on the back side and go through that process. And that's going to take, it all depends how long the chapter is, how many terms there are, but it's active. It's really important. Pull those terms out of the textbook chapters. Okay, remember that first task, vocabulary. This is that first step in mastering the vocabulary. Once you've gone through and have written out all the note cards, then go back, and then when you get to the summary, stop. There isn't going to be any new vocabulary terms in that summary. So stop before you read the summary and go back to the beginning, and now sit down, find a quiet time, get away from the distractions, turn your phone off, get the kids to sleep at night, find a quiet place where you can sit down and read the chapter word for word. And I can guarantee you, if you've skimmed the chapter and you've done the vocabulary, when you sit down to read that text, it's going to flow because you know what the major themes are. Okay, you've seen the visuals already. Now you're going to, while you're reading, you're going to see how those visuals support the text that you're reading. You're not going to get bogged down with information overload because you've seen all these terms now. You've written them out. You've practiced that vocabulary by writing out the note cards. And so it's going to really make you more efficient in reading the book from start to finish, that chapter, and you're going to get way more out of that reading than you would in terms of retention and understanding than trying to read it word for word without doing the first two steps. So it's a very active process and approach to your textbook, but it absolutely is a must to read the textbook. I will be teaching from this textbook and testing you out of this textbook. And it is for your success to take advantage, and you're reading and working with one of the finest biology textbooks that's out there. And you're paying some money, good money to get access to this textbook. Utilize it and get your money's worth out of it. When it comes to highlighting your textbook, I discourage that. I think it's a passive process. And, I see these textbooks like this example where everything is highlighted. And, that's not going to do you a whole lot of good in terms of the learning process. It's because it is passive. It's not really active. It's maybe good for identifying where you're going to find those vocabulary terms and where their definitions are to writing out those note cards, but don't highlight the textbook. When it comes to the lecture, by all means, it all depends. Are you in a face-to-face lecture? Go to class. If you're online and you're getting lectural support materials, your professors have provided PowerPoint slide decks of their lectures or YouTube videos of their lectures. Make sure you watch those lectures. If they have supporting notes, make sure you print off those notes and use the notes to follow the lecture and annotate those notes and add to them and highlight, emphasize the things, mark things on those notes that they're emphasizing in their lecture presentations, because that's probably going to be important material that they're wanting to understand and learn. And it very well could and going to end up being on the exam. So attending lectures, whether you're face-to-face or online, is active and engaging, and ask questions and be a participant in that process. When you're in lecture, make sure you're listening. Don't get distracted. Put your phone away. Take notes. You can do shorthands and then go back after the lecture and clean them up to keep up with the lecturer as they're presenting the material. But it's so important for you to be active in that process of attending lecture. Just passively sitting there and daydreaming is wasting your time. You might as well just stay home, but go to lecture, have a plan. Again, have the lecture notes out, make sure you're annotating them and emphasizing things that are being presented in the class so that you'll know what the instructor was focused on in that lecture presentation. Like I said, that very well be the kinds of concepts your instructors are going to test you on. You remember the lecture is there to not just explain everything. When I lecture, I can't go through the whole textbook and explain everything, but what I focus my lectures on are the more challenging and difficult concepts where students struggle to understand, and I go through it step by step and try to, explain, why this happens and where it happens and how, working through all those difficult concepts. And you participating in the lecture is going to help you to better understand those difficult concepts as well, and processes that we have to deal with in a class like biology. It also clarifies a lot of misconceptions. I have a picture there of a virus. And one of the first things we talk about in the first lecture is what is life? And 95% of my students who come into a biology class will answer the question that viruses are alive, and they're not. And that's a major misconception. And why aren't they? And that helps us to better understand, what biology is, the study of life. I mean, when you study things that are not living, it helps you to better understand things that are living. And so, those are the kinds of things we're trying to tackle in the lecture, help you to explain difficult concepts and clarify those misconceptions. You're going to be assigned homework in this class. And the homework is designed to focus on those concepts that we feel it's important for you to know. Some of that homework might involve concepts that we may not cover in the lecture or as in-depthly in the lecture, but we can through the homework. And the online homework is going to be very active. It's going to be interactive. It's going to be testing you to reinforce to make sure that you're engaged in those concepts and you're connecting those concepts with everybody's different learning style. Okay, there are textual learners, there are visual learners, there are abstract learners. There's all these different learning styles that students have, or a combination of different ones. And the homework is going to be active to cater to all learning styles. And the learning that you get through the homework is going to get you into that textbook and making sure you're understanding those concepts that the textbook is trying to teach you. Preparing for exams. The major weight of your course grade is based on how well you do on the lecture exams. And that takes practice. Practice. And so you want to make sure that you're putting in time, study time, in preparation of the exams. Now, in this class, you will be given a detailed study guide prior to every exam that will help you focus where you need to be spending your time on which concepts out of those chapters that the test will be covering. All right, so again, dream big. Be active in your learning process and be strategic. And to do that, you need to, we already talked about setting goals, but basically laying out a success plan is really important so that you can, lay out a process of, what happens what's my plan to tackle the lecture? What's my plan to be successful in the lab? What's my plan? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are the things that are going to, throw me off track? And if I get thrown off track by hitting a bump in the road, what am I going to do to get back on track? Because that's always the things that are happening as we, are taking courses and going through that learning process. Life happens, things pop up in our lives that can distract us away from our academic life as well, and our academic success. So what are you going to do to get yourself back on track? Setting up a roadmap for your academic success is a smart strategy and a smart plan to have in place when you're taking a class like this. You have all kinds of tools in your toolkit to be successful. We have tutors in the Academic Success Center. They also provide peer study groups. You'll be given study guides to exams. Your attendance in lecture and lab is critical to your overall success. Asking good questions. And what I mean by good questions are they're specific questions. If I get students asking these questions like, well, I don't understand any of this stuff on genetics in chapter 14. Well, you just told me you haven't done your homework about approaching chapter 14. But if you ask me a question, hey, I really don't understand how sex-linked inheritance works and how that's different than Mendelian inheritance, then you've asked a very specific question, and whether it's a tutor or myself, we can address that question very quickly and get you supported in getting an answer and a response to help you through that, answering your question. There's lots of good technology that's available. We have practice exams. We have a calendar set so that you know exactly what's happening. Make sure you set your own calendar, add that to your calendar with all your other courses and your work schedule, doing the homework, doing the flashcards, approaching the textbook with the 3 times through a chapter, setting aside study time, get rid of the distractions when it comes to studying in your academic life. And then a big thing is maintaining grit. And what I mean by that is persevere. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to hit bumps in the road, but don't let them get you down. Those are all part of your academic toolbox, the tools in your toolbox to having success. Okay, so create an action plan that's going to lead you down that roadmap to success. And that's going to help you get there. Now, you're not alone in the process. You have opportunities to work with a study group, find a study partner in class, set up a study group, ask each other questions, test each other. You know, when you ask each other questions, it tells you 2 things. You know, if you can answer the question, it tells you what you know. But if you can't answer the questions or you can't answer them correctly, it tells you what you don't know. And if you do that with plenty of time before an exam, you still have time to go figure those things out. Join a study group. The Academic Success Center will be running workshop study sessions each week for Biology 1. I highly encourage you to attend those. And, you know, I also will be running study sessions during the week, and participate in those. Bring questions, bring specific questions, and do your homework, and then you will get a lot of support in return when you do your work. So when you're working in a group, you're talking about biology, you're testing each other about biology, you're teaching each other. That's all active. Good stuff. If you can't get a study group or participate in one of the study groups, we'll set up an appointment with a tutor. They're free. They're available through the Academic Success Center, and they will work with you one-on-one to help you with your questions and get you on a path to, you know, helping you become more active in your learning process as well. We have a brand new Academic Success Center over in the technical building up on the 3rd floor. You need to stop over there physically or virtually and see what they're all about. But again, we're not going to be coming looking for you. You have to take the steps to find them, set up an appointment, and do yourself a big help. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. That's what we're here for. Whether you're asking me for help or going to the Academic Success Center for that kind of support, take advantage of it. I will be offering study sessions throughout the semester, particularly up in front of, you know, just prior to the lecture exams. And as I said, you will get a detailed study guide, and these study sessions will be focused on those concepts that the test will be covering. And again, they will be offered, you know, there'll be a couple of these study sessions offered prior to each lecture exam. So take advantage of those as well. And I also ask that, you know, when you need help, I already gave this example, you know, do your homework first. Ask specific questions. Don't say, hey, come to a study session. Hey, can you cover chapter 8 for us? No, we don't have that amount of time in a study session. But if there's something like, hey, I don't understand the difference between endergonic and exergonic reactions that are in chapter 8, then that's a very specific question. We can deal with that in a few minutes in a study session, and we can answer many more other questions as well. So it's all about efficiency. And but again, you need to do your work in order to get support and get help by asking good questions when you ask for help. Well, if you employ all these things I've just mentioned, you will be taking the right steps to reaching that success that you set out to achieve. And I always say what you put into it in terms of effort, you'll get out in terms of return. And I mentioned, successful students have grit, and grit stands for when students are open-minded. They have the willingness to grow academically in their thinking. They're going to be passionate about learning about what, in this case, biology. It's amazing understanding how life works. And, set yourself to being excited about what you're learning. And that's being part of being passionate. Grit is also there's a hardiness. You're going to be resilient. You're going to be ambitious in your achieving your goals. You're determined, motivated. You're instinctive. You're having perseverance. You're tenacious. Again, what I mentioned earlier, when students who have grit, when they hit a bump in the road, they steer themselves back on track. When you hit a wall, like in a marathon, you have a strategy. How are you going to get over that and getting yourself back on track? Learn from your mistakes, and you will gain so much more in the future. Having worked through those kinds of things, having grit, stay the course. And there you have strategies for success through active learning. And at the end of the semester, all the effort, all the work will pay off. And I can guarantee you, if you employed these things and have put in the time, you will have great success, not only in biology, but in all your academic coursework by utilizing these active learning strategies that I've mentioned today. So I want to wish you best of luck this semester and have great success in this class. Good luck.